Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation on seascapes and a bit of my PhD. But anyway, I'll go into it now. So a little bit about me to begin with. So my name's Rachael Priest, and I have studied at Plymouth University and Heriot Watt. But for the past kind of 3-4 years, I've been working on a diving charter vessel. And this has allowed me to kind of do a bit of science, but also develop certain techniques that are really invaluable to these projects. And now I'm at Newcastle University doing my PhD, but also kind of helping to deliver the Beneath the Waves project for Seascapes. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about Seascapes Scheme. So it's a national lottery heritage funded project. We've got just under £3 million, which is given between the area between the Tyne and the Tees, and we are aiming to deliver 23 projects in this location. And to give you an idea about the scale of this project, we've got loads of different project partners, and many of them are kind of shown here, such as the National Trust or Tees Archaeology. And Seascapes is split into 4 different sections: Blue Future, Accessing the Sea, Revealing Hidden Heritage, and Seascapes Over Time. So Blue Future is looking at the future of our marine environment, so beach care and aware, doing different events and community grants. Accessing the Sea is pretty self-explanatory. We've got a set of new steps going in, but also looking at coastal kind of centres and cycle routes. Revealing Hidden Heritage, which is where the project that I'm kind of helping on sits, and also Seascapes Over Time. So there's a lot of heritage with the marine environment between the Tyne and the Tees, so we really want to highlight this. To give you an idea about some of the projects that have been going on, we've got a lot of beach cleans that have gone on last year and this year now, kind of little term projects for kids, and local divers getting involved. But really, the project that I'm helping to deliver is looking at kind of, as it says, beneath the waves. So we're looking at using modern technology to really showcase that heritage that not everybody can see and that's kind of hidden under the water. And to give you an idea of the shipwrecks that are based between the Tyne and the Tees, I really like this image because it really shows you what is under that water. And every single one of these red kind of dots and names here, that is a shipwreck. So it really gives you an idea of the scale of wrecks that sit between the Tyne and the Tees. And the aim really is, with Beneath the Waves, is to get local divers involved and getting them involved, but also getting local people involved and collating all this information and showcasing it to people that may not ordinarily spend time by the coast, or they might not even know anything about it. The way we're going to do this is we are going to use modern technology called Photogrammetry. I'll give you a little explanation of how it works, but essentially you take footage or images and you stitch them together to generate these quite awesome 3D models. So how does it work? There's a series of steps that I've shown on the right hand side, but essentially you're taking a camera, whether it be a GoPro or kind of a more fancier DSLR, and some lights, and you're really just recording that subject that you're interested in. The first step is aligning the photos. So once you've collected them, the program essentially goes through those photos, picks on some points that it thinks are similar or the same between each image, and then the program stitches these all together. So you can see here you're kind of getting a feel of what the model is, but as you can see there's lots of black bits in there, and this image, if I was to zoom into it, is just a series of dots. The next stage is essentially adding more data. So whilst this image might look complete, again, if I was to zoom in, this is actually just a denser version of the image that we saw before and is made up of lots of little dots. The next step is to create a mesh. So the program essentially joins all of these dots together and drapes a mesh over it. It estimates what colour it should be, but it's not until you get to adding the texture that you really see that kind of high quality imagery that you're after. So if I just go back again, you can see, there you go, that one's a bit more kind of a bit blurrier, not as defined. And then when you click on this one, you can really see kind of the water and the shells and the rocks that were there for that image. And you end up with a final product like this. So what I've done here is just manipulated that 3D model so you can see it at a different angle. And hopefully this is going to play. So no, it can't play, but again, this is just showing that model in greater detail. And whilst I've given you an example of using that modern technology one way, this is another way of using it. So this model was actually created by Chris Rowland and Carrie Hyerton, which I'd like to say thank you for. This is off a wreck up in Scapa Flow, the Royal Oak, and you can see here in the middle there are two turrets, and what they've done here is they've generated a lovely 3D model of it. And then if I show you the next image, that's a photograph of the same two turrets, but with divers either side. So you can see that you've got the underwater image, but by generating that 3D model, you have a snapshot of that heritage that will be kept forever. And again, we've used 3D photogrammetry, again by Chris Rowlands and Carrie Hayden. And what they've done here is they've got multi-beam data of the wreck above, and you can see it highlighted in red there. That's the area that we're interested in. We want to get some kind of higher detail. So they've jumped in the water and they've created a lovely 3D photogrammetric model to look at this area in more detail. So it's a really, really useful tool, this photogrammetry. And again, thank you to Marcus Blatchford for letting us use this image. This is an image of a whole shipwreck. This image sits in the Sound and Mole just off of Oban, called the Hispania. And Marcus here has generated a model of the whole wreck, so it might not be in as much detail as the other ones, but it gives you an idea of kind of what's going on under the water. And this is something that can be achieved through this modern technology. So in terms of bringing it back to the Northeast, so we did a group project for Beneath the Waves last September, and we focused on a wreck called the Stag. Now, whilst they appreciate the image here isn't as detailed as some of the other ones, the Northeast does have variable conditions, and on this day they weren't amazing, but we still managed to get a model. And the point is that whilst it's a bit sparse, actually you can see the shape of that wreck and you can visualize, you can see what it would look like if you were to go for a dive. But more importantly, for kind of my side of things, you can see what marine life that shipwreck holds. And whilst with Beneath the Waves, we're interested in generating these 3D models, imagery is just as useful. So I think for me, it really brings home the amount of wrecks and kind of touching on it, that there's a picture here in that top right hand corner of a toilet. Now at some point, somebody from that wreck has actually sat in that toilet and used it. And there were people that died on this wreck. So actually it's quite poignant for me. So the point of Seascapes and Beneath the Waves is to bring all of this together. Another use for photogrammetry is that it is really useful for marine surveys. So prior to coming to Newcastle University, I spent some time up in Scapa Flow in Orkney and collected some kind of science and did some marine surveys. I use photogrammetry because it's quick and easy to collect the data, but the output is pretty amazing, to be honest. You can see on the right hand side that's a sea urchin, but there's also a transectate there, which gives you kind of the increments in centimetres, and you can, one, scale everything, but two, it's just so highly detailed, it makes collecting marine data a lot easier. In terms of my project, I actually wanted to count the species, so I did this manually, and you can see red rings around one species and then pink hexagons around another. So nothing majorly complicated, it's just the method that I used at that time. And this brings me on to some of what I did on the boat, but also what I'm looking at into for my PhD. And it's looking at the study of shipwrecks. So the general idea from when I was up in Scapa was I would do 4 transects on each wreck, run these out for 50 metres, and the image on the right gives you an idea of where I would place them. So kind of one on the bow, one on the stern, one on port, and one on starboard. These are the wrecks that I surveyed. To be quite honest, I was working at the time, so I just surveyed the wrecks that I had the most access to. So there wasn't a particular reason for choosing those. And the species that I chose to look at were the horse mussel, the burrowing anemone, and the Brittlestar. So when I got my results back from the wrecks up north, I found that the horse mussel actually didn't seem to be influenced by these shipwrecks. However, there did appear to be a lot more on one of the wrecks compared to the others. Whereas the burrowing anemone seemed to have an impact from those wrecks across the board. So each of those 5 wrecks was impacting on that species. You can see that closer to the wreck, there are a lot more individuals compared to much further away. And then the Brittlestar almost seemed to have a bit of both, to be quite honest. So on that dashed line there from the wreck of the Colne, it didn't seem like there was really much impact from the wreck, but from the Crown Prince wreck, the dark black line there seemed like there was an impact. And I think my head starts to go really into the area of, well, this species is motile, so maybe they are moving a lot more than previously thought, and whether they're moving to where the food is mostly accessible, whereas the other 2 don't really move around, so they have to choose the optimum place to feed, and they stay there most of their lives. But anyway, I think it gives you an idea that shipwrecks are a hub of biodiversity, and when you think about how many are between the Tyne and the Tees, there really has got to be some impact of wrecks on species. And I mean, you see it week on week when you go down to the port, especially Royal Quays in North Shields. There are a lot of anglers there, and they will, when they go out, target shipwrecks because that's where the fish are living. And that kind of brings you around to, like, why does it matter? Why is anybody looking at this? And I think that's because shipwrecks are the most common underwater artifacts. So that, for me, kind of signals that there might be something going on underwater. But also this brings me to carbon storage. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of the summit that was at Glasgow last year, but also the kind of that climate change is really on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. Now, carbon storage in the ocean is simply called blue carbon. And there is one paper that shows that horse mussels actually carry 13.8 grams of carbon per individual. Now, I kind of scaled that up on one of the wrecks that I was looking at, and only out to 30 metres. And it ended up being 218 kilograms of carbon, which is an awful lot of carbon. And when you think that's only one species on one wreck, well, what about the other species, and what about the other wrecks, and what about under the wrecks? So I think when you actually remove that water, you kind of start realizing that there's a lot more going on that we can't see. And in terms of the northeast, Well, Seascapes and Beneath the Waves, we as a team are aiming to document this heritage and bring it all together. And part of that is, for me, my PhD and looking at the science behind it all, especially with the thousands of shipwrecks that kind of live along this coast, but also using photogrammetry and modern technology and really bringing together the heritage on the northeast coast. Where we'll be able to see the results. So as part of the Seascapes scheme, we've got a new building that's being put up, and it will be near Suter Lighthouse. And this will showcase a lot of the data that we're hoping to collect. So a lot of those models that the local dive clubs will bring in, but also maybe some 3D printed models and some virtual reality. And for me, the virtual reality side of things is just pretty amazing, the technology that we've got these days. And I'm just bringing in a couple of images from the Scapa 100 project in 2019, which, whilst it was a few years ago, is really poignant to me, because this chap in the bottom right hand corner, he sat there with a VR headset on, and for me, he's quite a crucial part in this project, because he was a young lad and watched the Royal Oak kind of sink. And so he's watched this shipwreck sink, but he's now able to see that wreck under the water through virtual reality. And for me, that's the entire point of this project, is to kind of bring those stories home and really get people to understand and see all the heritage that is under the water in the northeast coast. So that's me and the project that I'm kind of working on. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to send them to me. And yeah, I'd just like to thank you for listening, and hope you have a good day.